Hello everyone and welcome back to 10 Things About Writing. Today I'm going to talk to you about one of the main elements of building your story. Now, lots of people approach storytelling in different ways. Some people like to plan everything very carefully before they start, and some people like me prefer to have a slightly more fluid approach and to kind of basically have a general idea of the path they're going on, but make up a lot of the details as they go along. Either's fine. There is no single way to write a story. Whichever way works for you is the way that works for you. So I'm not going to impose any kind of rules here because I don't believe there are any. Instead, I'm going to have a look at the way stories actually work. And if you are a reader, and you should be a reader, you will be able to recognise some of these elements anyway from your own reading. Now, first of all, what's the difference between story and plot? A lot of people ask me this all the time. They're not interchangeable terms. Basically, story is simply what happens. A to B to C, a progression of events. Plot is essentially why it happens. So plot is the thing that makes your story interesting and profound and engaging to your readership. And almost all stories, whether they are short stories or movies or plays or novels, follow a basic story structure. At this point, some of you will be thinking, what about James Joyce? What about Ulysses? None of us are James Joyce. Sometimes I kind of wish that James Joyce wasn't James Joyce. I'm talking about the familiar plot structure which will enable you to take an audience with you on a journey. Because that's what it is, storytelling. Effectively, it's a kind of bond that you're making with your potential reader, saying, I am going to take you on a journey. There will be certain people who will accompany us, the characters. We will go a certain way. I'm not going to quite tell you which way because I'm going to keep you in suspense. But trust me, we will get to somewhere where everything that we've been building up to makes sense and you will be happy and satisfied with the outcome. That's effectively what you're telling an audience when you start them off telling them a story. And stories often follow the same basic 3-act structure, if you like. I'm assuming that most of you are writing novels. That may not be the case, but because I mostly write novels, I'm going to use this, I'm going to frame this with the novel format, but it will work for any story you want to tell, in any medium, I promise you. So there's a beginning, there is a middle, and there is an end to your story. Always, there has to be this, because otherwise your readers, who are used to reading stories with beginnings, middles, and ends, will feel that somehow there's something missing. They haven't been taken on a satisfactory journey. Something went wrong. They will most likely leave your story feeling unsatisfied, and this is not what we want. Now, the journey begins with what I think of as the exposition phase. If we think of this as going for a walk, we're going for a walk up a hill, but first of all we're going to go along a bit of a flat bit. The flat bit is there to explore the terrain, to get you to know the characters who will accompany you on your journey, and to have some sort of idea of where the plot will be taking you. And so it's the expositional phase. During this phase, I would expect you to have introduced your characters, introduced your reader to the world that you're depicting in some way, and also given them at least some idea of where you're going. So by the end of the expositional phase, which I would think should be about a quarter of the length of your story, you should have done all of that, at which point there will be a moment, a beat, where you and the reader make a pact to go on this journey together to this conclusion. It will either be a quest, where the main character of your story is given a task to fulfill. They will go on an adventure, they will have various encounters, they will have reversals, they will have beats. The final encounter will be the encounter with the big adversary or the end of the quest or the thing that your main character needs to do, having accomplished all their other objectives. And that, which I think should take about half of your story, is the main part of the narrative. This part, we'll talk a little more about that, but is mostly about events, meeting people, reactions, and the correct management of tension, which I'll talk about a bit later. The third part, which is not an escalation anymore, it's a kind of gentle slope down the hill again, not all the way down the hill, because you always keep a little tension at the end of your story, but it is the wrapping up of the story, the tying up of loose ends, the satisfactory conclusion of your journey. It's the bit where you look at your reader and you think, okay, have I given this reader what I promised them? Have I got to where I wanted to be? Are they happy with the ending? That doesn't necessarily mean, is it a happy ending? It can be a very sad ending, but have I led them the right way? Have I led them the way I promised to lead them? Have I given them enough? And so that, which again should be about a quarter of your full narrative, is the tying up of loose ends, the ending bit. Now, that's fairly basic in terms of plot structure. There are some different ways of explaining this, but to me, it's basically exactly this. This flat bit, this going up the hill, and then this slight curving descent. So that should be the shape of any story. And one of the things that I'd like you to do in your 15 minutes practice today is take any story. Maybe it's the one you're reading now, maybe it's the one you're writing now. And I would like you to make a little graph of it. A little graph showing the expositional part, the things that happen to set the scene, introduce the characters, introduce the world. Then the story part with the encounters, the adventures, the events that make that story worth following. And then the third part, the wind down from the climax, where your characters get to where you promised them that they would be. And I'd like you to do this with absolutely any story at all, and just look at its construction. It can be a film, it can be a short story, it can be a novel. Most of them will follow this structure. And the more you read, the more the story structure becomes intuitively embedded in the way you process stories. I would like you to, as part of your practice, to start reading mindfully, in the sense that as soon as you're a writer, you don't just read like a reader anymore. You also read like a writer, and I'd like you to start looking at the way you process stories and how those stories are built. Because when it comes to building your own story, that will be extremely helpful. And every writer I know says this, but I'm going to say it again. Reading is one of your biggest and best tools as a writer. The more you read, the better you will be as a writer. The more you process art, the better you will be at making art. If you don't have time to read, I can't imagine how you would have time to be a better writer. And so do take time to read, and try also to read outside of your comfort zone as often and as much as possible. Everything is useful in reading terms. High fiction, low fiction, if there is such a thing, genre fiction, non-fiction, it is all grist to the mill. Even reading the most terrible book ever written will teach you something, even if it's how not to write a book. So read, have a look at how things are constructed, try to get a feel of the pattern of a story, and that way when you approach your own writing journey, you will have, whether you are a plotter, an architectural designer of stories, or whether you would rather just fly by the seat of your pants and hope you get there, you will still have a general idea of the trajectory in which you're going. Tomorrow I'm going to talk about tension, which is one of the things that keeps plot going. So tune in again then, around the same time, And meantime, if you want to check out my book, 10 Things About Writing, it's now available on Amazon, at least in the UK. If you're in the US, you may have to wait a little more for that, but I'm hoping very soon that it will be available to you too. See you tomorrow. Bye bye.